I was sitting on the couch with a cold beer in hand, the television blaring with the excitement of a football game. My team was ahead, the crowd roaring from the speakers, but I barely noticed. My mind wasn't on the game. It hadn't been for weeks. Instead, it was circling back to the same nagging thoughts, the same details that didn't add up. Emily, my wife of 7 years, had always been steady, reliable, someone I could trust without question. Until recently, I'd never had a reason to doubt her. But now, something wasn't right. It had started subtly, so much so that I wasn't sure when the first seed of doubt had been planted. Maybe it was when she began disappearing more often in the evenings. She always had a reason, of course. Her best friend Mia was going through a nasty divorce, and Emily had been a rock for her, listening, supporting, spending hours comforting her. At first, I admired her for it. That's who Emily was, compassionate, selfless, always putting others before herself. I even encouraged her to take the time. "Mia needs you," I'd said, never imagining I'd come to regret those words. But then, little things started to bother me. Last week, she'd come home late, close to midnight. I was half asleep on the couch when I heard her keys in the door. She walked in with that calm smile she always wore, her face relaxed. She told me she and Mia had been at a cozy cafe talking for hours. It was a reasonable explanation, and I wanted to believe her. But as she walked past me to hang up her coat, I caught a faint scent of men's cologne. It wasn't overpowering, but it was distinct. Not the kind of thing you expect to notice on your wife after an evening spent with her best friend. I tried to brush it off. Cafes are crowded places, right? Maybe a waiter or someone sitting nearby wore it. It happens. But no matter how logical that sounded, the thought lingered in the back of my mind. Then there was the Saturday incident. Emily said she was going out to buy curtains for the living room. It seemed like a normal errand, so I didn't think much of it. But she was gone for 5 hours. When she finally came back, she had several shopping bags in tow, complete with receipts to prove she'd been shopping. Everything seemed above board, until I noticed the bottle of red wine tucked into one of the bags. Expensive red wine. Emily never drank red wine. She was strictly a white wine or cocktail kind of woman. "Oh, it's for Mia," she said when I asked about it. "She's been getting into red wine lately, and I thought it'd make a nice gift." Her smile was easy, her explanation perfectly reasonable. But something about it felt off. Why buy such an expensive bottle for a casual gift? And why not mention it beforehand? I didn't press her on it at the time, but it stuck with me. These little things, they were starting to stack up. Emily was always composed, always prepared with answers. She never hesitated, never stumbled. Her phone wasn't hidden. It sat openly on the table or kitchen counter. She wasn't one of those people who clutched their phone like a lifeline. If she was hiding something, she was doing an exceptional job. But then there was the text. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Mia. "Thank you for being with me last night. Did you have to leave early? I hope he didn't suspect anything." My stomach tightened as I stared at the words. For a moment, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Texts can be misinterpreted, right? Maybe Mia was just being overly cautious, worried about me getting upset over Emily coming home late. When Emily came out of the shower, I handed her the phone and mentioned the message. She read it quickly, then sighed dramatically. "Mia's overthinking again," she said with a laugh. "I keep telling her you're not some monster who's going to blow up if I come home late." Her words were lighthearted, her tone playful, but they didn't sit right with me. That wasn't how Emily usually spoke about me, and Mia's text didn't sound like her usual tone either. Still, I nodded and let it slide. What else could I do? Accuse her of something based on a gut feeling? I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid, controlling cliché. But that one message kept replaying in my mind, over and over, like a broken record. I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior. I wasn't obvious about it, but I made mental notes of everything. What time she left, when she came back, how she acted when she was home. The more I watched, the more the little details added up. Her phone, for instance. It was still out in the open, but she wasn't using it as much when I was around. Normally, she'd scroll through social media or send texts while we watched TV. Now it stayed face down on the table. The doubts were growing louder, harder to ignore. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew one thing. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't the kind of man to sit quietly while my gut told me something was wrong. It was time to figure out the truth. No more brushing things off, no more excuses. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. I've always prided myself on being a rational man. Emily had a way of explaining things that made sense. Her words carefully chosen and delivered with such confidence that doubting her felt almost absurd. For the longest time, I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the woman I trusted with every part of my life. But lately, her explanations had begun to feel rehearsed, too polished, as though she anticipated my questions before I even asked them. Every time I brought up something that didn't sit right, she had a response. Logical, calm, and delivered with that same composed smile. Take the night she came home smelling of men's cologne. I'd asked her about it casually, trying to hide the unease curling in my chest. "Oh, that?" she said, laughing lightly. "It must have been from the cafe. You know how crowded those places get. Someone probably brushed past me." It made sense. Cafes were crowded, full of people coming and going. It could have been a waiter or someone seated nearby. I nodded and let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then there was the bottle of red wine. Emily had gone out shopping for curtains, a normal enough errand, and came back with several bags and the receipts to match. She'd even taken the time to lay out the curtains she bought, asking for my opinion on the color. Everything seemed fine until I spotted the wine tucked neatly into one of the bags. Expensive red wine. Emily didn't drink red wine. She'd never liked it. I asked her about it, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. "Oh, that's for Mia," she said with a smile. "She's been getting into red wine lately, and I thought it'd make a nice gift." Her smile was easy, her explanation perfectly reasonable. But something about it felt off. Why buy such an expensive bottle for a casual gift? And why not mention it beforehand? I didn't press her on it at the time, but it stuck with me. These little things, they were starting to stack up. Emily was always composed, always prepared with answers. She never hesitated, never stumbled. Her phone wasn't hidden. It sat openly on the table or kitchen counter. She wasn't one of those people who clutch their phone like a lifeline. If she was hiding something, she was doing an exceptional job. But then, there was the text. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Mia. "Thank you for being with me last night. Did you have to leave early? I hope he didn't suspect anything." My stomach tightened as I stared at the words. For a moment, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Texts can be misinterpreted, right? Maybe Mia was just being overly cautious, worried about me getting upset over Emily coming home late. When Emily came out of the shower, I handed her the phone and mentioned the message. She read it quickly, then sighed dramatically. "Mia's overthinking again," she said with a laugh. "I keep telling her you're not some monster who's gonna blow up if I come home late." Her words were light-hearted, her tone playful, but they didn't sit right with me. That wasn't how Emily usually spoke about me, and Mia's text didn't sound like her usual tone either. Still, I nodded and let it slide. What else could I do? Accuse her of something based on a gut feeling? I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid, controlling cliché. But that one message kept replaying in my mind over and over like a broken record. I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior. I wasn't obvious about it, but I made mental notes of everything. What time she left, when she came back, how she acted when she was home. The more I watched, the more the little details added up. Her phone, for instance. It was still out in the open, but she wasn't using it as much when I was around. Normally, she'd scroll through social media or send texts while we watched TV. Now it stayed face down on the table. The doubts were growing louder, harder to ignore. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew one thing. Something wasn't right. And I wasn't the kind of man to sit quietly while my gut told me something was wrong. It was time to figure out the truth. No more brushing things off. No more excuses. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. I've always prided myself on being a rational man. Emily had a way of explaining things that made sense. Her words carefully chosen and delivered with such confidence that doubting her felt almost absurd. For the longest time, I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the woman I trusted with every part of my life. But lately, her explanations had begun to feel rehearsed, too polished, as though she anticipated my questions before I even asked them. Every time I brought up something that didn't sit right, she had a response, logical, calm, and delivered with that same composed smile. Take the night she came home smelling of men's cologne. I'd asked her about it casually, trying to hide the unease curling in my chest. "Oh, that?" she said, laughing lightly. "It must have been from the cafe. You know how crowded those places get. Someone probably brushed past me." It made sense. Cafes were crowded, full of people coming and going. It could have been a waiter or someone seated nearby. I nodded and let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then there was the bottle of red wine. Emily had gone out shopping for curtains, a normal enough errand, and came back with several bags and the receipts to match. She'd even taken the time to lay out the curtains she bought, asking for my opinion on the color. Everything seemed fine, until I spotted the wine tucked neatly into one of the bags. Expensive red wine. Emily didn't drink red wine. She'd never liked it. I asked her about it, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. "Oh, that's for Mia," she said with a smile. "She's been getting into red wine lately, and I thought it'd make a nice gift." Her answer was so smooth, so perfectly reasonable, that I couldn't argue with it. Why wouldn't she buy her best friend a thoughtful gift, especially considering everything Mia was going through? But as she spoke, I couldn't help but wonder. Why hadn't she mentioned it earlier? Why buy such an expensive bottle for a casual gift? The doubt simmered beneath the surface, but I didn't press her. I didn't want to start a fight over something that on paper seemed harmless. Still, I made a mental note. Emily's behavior wasn't just consistent, it was impeccable. Her explanations were always logical, her tone unwavering. There was never a slip, never a moment of hesitation. It was as if she'd rehearsed every possible question I might ask and had the answers ready to go. Even her phone, always in plain sight, sitting openly on the counter or the coffee table, seemed to back up her claims of having nothing to hide. She didn't clutch it obsessively like some people did. It wasn't locked away or turned face down as you'd expect from someone hiding something. If she was lying, she was doing an incredible job of covering her tracks. But then came the text from Mia. "Thank you for being with me last night. Did you have to leave early? I hope he didn't suspect anything." The words replayed in my head over and over. At first, I told myself I was misinterpreting it. Maybe Mia was just being overly cautious, worried that I might get upset about Emily spending so much time with her. When I asked Emily about it, her response was immediate, almost dismissive. "Mia's overthinking again," she'd said, rolling her eyes. "I keep telling her you're not some jealous control freak." Her explanation was plausible, but the tone didn't match her usual way of speaking about me. And why was Mia suddenly acting so cryptic? The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Over the next few days, I started to notice other things. Emily's phone, once freely used while we watched TV, was now sitting face down more often. When I asked her what she was doing, she'd shrug and say, "Just tired of scrolling," or "Nothing interesting online today." It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A shift in her behavior, in the way she interacted with me. Then came the evening she announced she'd be spending time with Mia again. Same story, different day. I smiled, told her to be safe, and watched as she walked out the door. Sitting alone in the quiet of our living room, I tried to tell myself that everything was fine. But the little inconsistencies were piling up, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Her excuses were too perfect, too airtight. Nobody was that consistent. As much as I wanted to believe her, my gut told me otherwise. I kept replaying every conversation in my head, dissecting her words, searching for cracks in her armor. If she was lying, she was better at it than anyone I'd ever known. But even the best liars slip up eventually. And so I resolved to find the truth. I wasn't going to accuse her outright, not yet. I needed more than a gut feeling. I needed proof. Emily might have her perfect alibis, but I wasn't the fool she thought I was. The game had started, and I was determined to win. They say trust is the foundation of every strong marriage. For years, I believed that Emily and I had built ours on solid ground. But as I sat in the living room that evening, staring at her phone lying face down on the counter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, nothing anyone else would have noticed. But I knew Emily better than anyone, or at least I thought I did. Little things, barely perceptible, had started to catch my attention. Emily wasn't using her phone as much around me anymore. Normally, she'd scroll through social media or text friends while we watched TV together. Now the phone was there but untouched, sitting screen down on the coffee table or kitchen counter. It wasn't like her. I told myself I was overthinking, letting paranoia creep in where it didn't belong. But then I remembered the text from Mia, the one that had set everything into motion. "Thank you for being with me last night. Did you have to leave early? I hope he didn't suspect anything." I tried to brush it off, to believe Emily's explanation that Mia was simply overthinking, but the words had lodged themselves in my mind like a splinter. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I wasn't going to be the husband who snooped through his wife's phone or followed her around like some character in a bad soap opera. That wasn't me. But I also couldn't sit back and pretend everything was fine. So I started paying attention. Not in an obvious way, Emily was too sharp for that, but quietly, carefully. I took mental notes of her comings and goings, the timing of her excuses, the little things that didn't quite add up. Like the other night, when she came home late after another coffee shop chat with Mia. She seemed relaxed, smiling as she kicked off her shoes and walked into the kitchen. But there was a faint flush to her cheeks, like she'd been out in the cold for too long, and her coat smelled faintly of cologne again. I didn't say anything. I just watched as she hung up her coat and made herself a cup of tea, humming softly under her breath. The next morning, I noticed that she'd left her phone on the counter again, something she always did before heading into the shower. But this time, I paid closer attention. When it buzzed, I glanced at the screen. Just a quick look, not enough to feel like I was crossing a line. It was another text from Mia. "Let me know when you're free again. Last night was amazing. I hope he didn't notice anything." My chest tightened. It could have meant anything, I told myself. Maybe Mia was just grateful for Emily's support, for the time she'd spent helping her through a tough situation. But why the secrecy? Why the cryptic tone? I handed Emily her phone when she came out of the shower, her hair wrapped in a towel. She read the message quickly, her expression unreadable. "Mia's just being dramatic again," she said with a laugh, tossing the phone onto the couch. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but my doubts were growing. Over the next few days, I became more deliberate in my observations. I watched how Emily carried herself, how her tone shifted when I asked about her plans. I noticed that she started taking longer to get ready before heading out, her outfits casual but carefully chosen, her makeup subtle but just enough to suggest effort. When she came home, she was always cheerful, always quick to offer explanations for her whereabouts. Mia needed to talk about some paperwork for the divorce. Or, we were just catching up on old memories. Her stories were plausible, even convincing, but they were too perfect. And then there was her routine at home. Emily was always composed, always organized, but now it felt like she was playing a part. She still made coffee in the mornings, still kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, but there was a distance in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't talk her way out of. So I kept watching, waiting for a slip, a crack in her armor. Emily was good at this game, but I was learning the rules. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. When she smiled at me across the dinner table, I smiled back. When she kissed me goodnight, I kissed her too. But in the back of my mind, I was always searching, always questioning. Every detail mattered now. What time she left, when she came back, what she wore, how she smelled, what she said. It was exhausting, keeping track of it all, but I couldn't stop. If Emily was hiding something, I was going to find out, one way or another. And when I did, I'd be ready. It was time for a plan. Sitting on the couch with a lukewarm beer in my hand, I realized that all the overthinking in the world wasn't going to give me the answers I needed. If Emily was lying, if there was something going on behind my back, then I needed proof. Hard evidence. I wasn't about to confront her without it. Emily was too smart, too composed. She'd talk her way out of it, twist my words, and somehow make me feel like the paranoid one. No, I couldn't afford to rely on accusations alone. I needed to catch her in the act. The idea came to me while I was watching an old detective show. The protagonist had used a piece of tape to see if someone had tampered with a locked drawer. Simple, subtle, and almost foolproof. That night, while Emily was getting ready to head out, yet another evening spent comforting Mia, I slipped into the garage and grabbed a roll of clear tape. My heart was pounding as I carefully tore off a small piece and placed it along the lower edge of the driver's seat in her car. If she adjusted the seat, or if someone else sat there, the tape would tear or shift. It was a small thing, something Emily would never notice unless she was actively looking for it. And that's what made it perfect. She left the house at exactly 7 p.m., dressed casually but with an air of effort. Jeans that fit just right, a simple blouse, and a hint of perfume that lingered in the air after she kissed me goodbye. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile, and then she was gone. For the next 4 hours, I sat in the silence of the house, trying to distract myself with the television. But my eyes kept darting to the clock. 8 p.m., 9:30 p.m., 10:45 p.m. Each passing minute felt heavier than the last. Finally, at 11 p.m., I heard the familiar jingle of her keys in the door. She walked in, looking a little tired but in high spirits, and headed straight to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea. "Long night?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Yeah, Mia's having a rough time," she said, her voice steady. "We went through some old photos. You know how emotional she gets." I nodded, pretending to buy it. As she settled into her nightly routine, I excused myself and headed to the garage. My heart raced as I opened her car door and crouched down to inspect the tape. It was completely undisturbed. The seat hadn't moved an inch. I should have felt relieved. This should have been the moment when my paranoia was put to rest, when I could finally let go of the doubts that had been gnawing at me. But instead, I felt even more unsettled. If Emily wasn't meeting someone, if she wasn't using her car, then how was she getting around? The following weekend, she announced she'd be spending another evening with Mia. "We're going to her place this time," she said, pulling her coat on. "Just a quiet night in. I'll probably be back late." I smiled and told her to have a good time, but the moment she was out the door, I grabbed my phone and sent her a text. "Hey, I was thinking, what if I drop by with some pizza? I'm sure you and Mia could use a break." It took her 10 minutes to respond. When the reply finally came, it was flawless. "Oh, honey, that's so sweet, but we're discussing something really personal tonight. I think Mia would feel uncomfortable. But thank you, you're the best." It was the perfect answer. Too perfect. Logical, considerate, and exactly what I would expect her to say if everything was above board. But it didn't sit right with me. So I decided to take it a step further. I dialed Mia's number directly. She picked up after a few rings, her voice slightly tense. "Oh, hi, Jason. What's up?" "Just checking in," I said casually. "Emily mentioned she's with you tonight. Everything okay?" There was a brief hesitation on her end, barely noticeable, but enough to make my stomach tighten. Yeah, she's here," Mia said quickly. "She's in the bathroom right now. We've just been talking. Thanks for checking in." Her tone was off, rushed, like she was trying too hard to sound normal. I thanked her and hung up, but my mind was already racing. If Emily was with Mia, then why did Mia sound so nervous? I didn't have answers yet, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Emily might have thought she was 2 steps ahead, but I was catching up. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat on the couch that evening, staring at my phone, replaying her text in my head. "Oh, honey, that's so sweet, but we're discussing something really personal tonight. I think Mia would feel uncomfortable. But thank you. You're the best." It was the perfect response, crafted to diffuse suspicion and stroke my ego in one go. But that was the problem. It was too perfect. The logic held up, sure, but it felt rehearsed, scripted even. I couldn't shake the unease growing in the pit of my stomach. The night before, I'd tried calling Mia to confirm Emily's story. Her voice had sounded just slightly off, a little too eager to reassure me that Emily was with her. The hesitation before her words was brief, but I caught it. Emily always said, "Trust is the glue that holds a marriage together." I'd lived by that principle for years. But now, that glue was cracking under the weight of unanswered questions. I needed to test her story further, push the boundaries of her lies and see how far they stretched. The next morning, over breakfast, Emily casually mentioned a work networking event coming up at a downtown hotel. "It's mandatory," she said, buttering her toast with the same ease as if she were discussing the weather. "Just a bunch of boring speeches and awkward small talk." I nodded, pretending to sympathize. "Sounds dreadful," I said with a chuckle. But as soon as she left for work, I picked up my phone and called Jake, an old college buddy who worked security at that very hotel. Jake was one of those guys who'd do anything for a friend, and I was counting on that loyalty now. "Hey, Jake," I said. "Listen, I need a favor. My wife's attending some work event at your hotel tomorrow night. Could you keep an eye out for her? Let me know if you see her and who she's with." Jake hesitated for a second before agreeing. "Sure thing, man. Just send me her picture and I'll keep you updated." The next evening, as Emily got ready, I watched her closely. She looked polished but understated, her outfit casual yet carefully chosen. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out, her smile as genuine as ever. "Don't wait up," she said. As soon as she left, I texted Jake. He replied an hour later. "Yeah, she's here. Event seems legit. Lots of people from her company. But she's been spending a lot of time on the terrace, talking to some guy in a gray suit. Thought you'd want to know I read the message twice, my hands gripping the phone tightly." The terrace? Talking to some guy? My pulse quickened as anger and dread coursed through me. When Emily got home later that night, she seemed relaxed, even cheerful. She regaled me with stories about the speeches, the hors d'oeuvres, and the awkward small talk she'd endured. She even showed me a few pictures of her with colleagues, their smiles wide against elegant backdrops. I waited until she finished her story before asking, as casually as I could, "Did you get a chance to check out the terrace? I hear the view's amazing." She didn't miss a beat. "Oh no, I didn't really go out there. It was too windy and everyone stayed inside." There it was, the first crack in her armor. Jake had seen her on the terrace, talking to a man in a gray suit. Yet here she was, confidently telling me she hadn't stepped foot outside. I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. "That's strange," I said evenly. "Jake mentioned he saw you out there." For a brief second, something flickered across her face. Confusion? Guilt? I couldn't tell. Then she laughed lightly. "Jake? I didn't know he was working there. He must have mistaken me for someone else." Her deflection was smooth, but not perfect. I could feel the threads of her story beginning to unravel. I looked her straight in the eyes. "Is there someone else, Emily? Just tell me the truth." Her smile faltered, replaced with an expression that was equal parts frustration and disbelief. "Jason, don't be ridiculous. You know me better than that. I've always been honest with you." Maybe she had been once. But now? I wasn't so sure. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, turning over every detail in my mind. Her excuses were starting to crumble, her lies becoming harder to sustain. But I needed more than cracks and suspicions. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. The trap had been set, and she'd already stumbled once. Now I just had to wait for her to fall completely. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of Emily on the terrace, talking to a man in a gray suit, kept replaying in my mind. Jake's text had been clear, and Emily's denial had been just as obvious. She was lying, and for the first time, I felt certain of it. The next morning, as Emily moved around the kitchen, humming a soft tune while pouring coffee, I watched her like a hawk. She seemed so at ease, like she had nothing to hide. But now every detail of her behavior felt like a puzzle piece waiting to be placed. She handed me a cup of coffee, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and smiled. "What's your plan for the day?" she asked casually. "Just the usual," I said, keeping my tone light. "What about you?" "Busy day at work," she replied. "Meetings, emails, the usual grind." She was good. Too good. Her tone was relaxed, her movements fluid, and her smile convincing. But now that I was paying closer attention, the cracks were easier to spot. I decided to start digging. After she left for work, I went through the trash in the bathroom, a place she rarely checked. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I needed answers. Among the crumpled tissues and empty packaging, I spotted 2 coffee cups. They were from a downtown cafe. Branded cups I recognized instantly. They were fresh, barely crumpled, and the logos gleamed as if they'd just been tossed. Downtown, the same area where she'd supposedly been spending time at Mia's house. Why would Emily stop at a downtown cafe for coffee if she was heading straight to Mia's? That evening, I casually mentioned the cups while we were eating dinner. "By the way, I noticed some coffee cups in the trash this morning. Did you stop for coffee last night?" She paused for a moment, just a fraction of a second before replying. "Oh yeah, I grabbed them on the way to Mia's. You know me, I can't survive without caffeine." Her response was smooth, logical even, but something about it felt too rehearsed, too ready. "2 cups?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She smiled. "One for me, one for Mia. Thought I'd surprise her. She's been so stressed lately." The explanation fit, but the way she delivered it made my stomach churn. Her answers were always perfect, always reasonable. But when you stack up perfect explanations, one on top of another, they start to feel anything but reasonable. The next clue came 2 days later. Emily told me she had another work event at a downtown hotel, this time a team-building dinner. Coincidentally, Jake was working security again, so I called him. "Keep an eye out for her," I said. "Let me know what you see." Hours later, Jake sent me a picture. It showed Emily seated at a table with several colleagues. Everyone looked professional, and the setting seemed legitimate. But Jake added a note that made my blood run cold. She stepped out for a while, spent about 30 minutes on the terrace again. Same guy as last time, gray suit. I stared at the photo for a long time, my pulse pounding. The hotel event might have been real, but Emily's time on the terrace wasn't part of it. When she came home that night, she was cheerful, as always. She talked about the event, the food, the awkward icebreakers. She even showed me pictures of her smiling with her colleagues. I waited until she'd finished her story before dropping the question. "Did you step out onto the terrace this time? You said the view was amazing last time, didn't you?" She blinked, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise? Panic? Then she laughed lightly. "Oh no, it was too cold out tonight. Everyone stayed inside." Another lie. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew what I'd seen. Her mask was slipping, and the cracks were becoming more obvious. That night, as I lay in bed, I pieced together everything I'd learned. The coffee cups, the man on the terrace, the perfect excuses that didn't quite add up. I wasn't imagining things. Emily was hiding something, and now I was more determined than ever to find out what it was. The clues were there, scattered like breadcrumbs. All I had to do was follow them to the truth. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I couldn't do this alone. Emily was a master at creating airtight stories, her lies woven so seamlessly into the fabric of our daily lives that confronting her head-on would only give her the upper hand. If I was going to get to the truth, I needed help. So I turned to the people I trusted most: Mark, Ryan, Ethan, and Caleb. These were my closest friends, the guys I'd known for years, through thick and thin. We'd shared beers, laughs, and stories, and I'd never doubted their loyalty. If anyone could help me, it was them. We met in my garage one evening, the air thick with the scent of motor oil and the faint hum of an old radio playing classic rock in the corner. Motorcycle parts were scattered across the workbench, a half-empty six-pack sat on the makeshift table, and the tension in the room was palpable. I laid it all out for them. Emily's late nights, the suspicious text messages, the unexplained coffee cups, and the man in the gray suit on the terrace. "I don't want to sound paranoid," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "But something's going on. I don't have solid proof yet, just pieces. And I need your help to figure this out." Mark was the first to speak. "We're with you, man. If something's happening, we'll figure it out." Ryan nodded. "Yeah, just tell us what you need. We've got your back." The plan was simple. Each of them would take a turn observing Emily on her nights out. Nothing intrusive or illegal, just quiet observation. If she was telling the truth, then great. But if not, I needed to know. The first test came quickly. Emily mentioned a work dinner at a downtown restaurant, and Mark volunteered to keep an eye on her. He parked his car across the street, positioned with a clear view of the entrance, and waited. A couple of hours later, I got a text. "All clear. She's inside with her colleagues. Looks professional. Nothing weird so far." When Emily came home that night, she showed me pictures of the event. Smiling faces, wine glasses, and elegant lighting. It all seemed perfectly normal. But when I spoke to Mark the next day, his tone gave me pause. "You sure everything was fine?" I asked, studying his expression. He hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Yeah, man. Looked legit. Nothing out of the ordinary." But his hesitation lingered in my mind. Mark was a terrible liar. The next opportunity came when Emily said she'd be visiting Mia again. This time, Ryan took the lead. He parked near Mia's house and watched for hours, texting me updates. "Lights are on. Saw her silhouette a couple of times. Looks like she's there. When Emily came home later that night, she carried an old photo album, claiming she and Mia had spent the evening reminiscing over childhood memories. The pictures she showed me seemed genuine, but something didn't sit right. When I casually asked Ryan later, "Did you see Mia herself?" His response was evasive. "No, but I saw movement in the windows. It was them for sure." Shadows in the windows weren't people, and Ryan's hesitation only added to my doubts. The breaking point came when Emily mentioned another night out with Mia, this time for drinks at a trendy downtown bar. Caleb offered to follow her, and hours later, he sent me a picture of Emily and Mia sitting at a table, drinks in hand. "All good," Caleb texted. "They're here, just talking." But something about the photo caught my attention. The background didn't match the bar Emily had mentioned. The decor, the lighting, it was all wrong. When I confronted Caleb about it, his response was clumsy. Maybe I got the wrong angle. But they were there. I saw them." His fumbling answer confirmed what I'd started to suspect. My friends weren't just observing Emily, they were covering for her. The truth hit me like a freight train. These men, my closest friends, weren't on my side. They were part of it, complicit in Emily's lies. That night, as I sat alone in the garage, I replayed every interaction, every text, every conversation. The loyalty I thought I could count on had been nothing but a facade. If Emily and my so-called friends thought they could outsmart me, they were wrong. They'd underestimated me. The betrayal only made my resolve stronger. Now I wasn't just searching for answers. I was preparing for a reckoning. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about all of them. And they had no idea what was coming. I couldn't shake the gnawing sense that the people I trusted most weren't just failing me. They were actively working against me. The doubts had been growing for weeks, but it wasn't until that night at the bar with Mark, Ryan, Ethan, and Caleb that everything became crystal clear. It started innocently enough. We gathered at our usual spot, a hole-in-the-wall bar we'd been frequenting for years. The smell of beer and fried food hung heavy in the air, and the dim lighting made it easy to pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't. I ordered a beer, leaned back in my chair, and watched them. Mark was unusually quiet, sipping his drink like it was his first one ever. Ryan kept glancing at his phone, his laughter forced every time someone cracked a joke. Ethan and Caleb, always the loudest in the group, were unusually subdued. The air was thick with tension, but no one was willing to acknowledge it. "So," I began, swirling my beer in its glass. "Thanks for helping me out with Emily. I know it's been a lot to ask." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yeah, man, no problem. Anything for you." Ryan nodded quickly, his eyes darting to mine for only a split second before he looked away. It was the way they avoided my gaze, the nervous energy radiating from the table that confirmed what I'd been dreading. These weren't men helping me get to the truth. They were hiding something. I took a long sip of my beer, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You know, I've been thinking about that night Caleb sent me the photo of Emily and Mia at the bar." Caleb froze, his hand halfway to his drink. "Yeah? What about it?" "The background didn't match the bar she said she was going to," I said evenly. "It didn't match any bar in the area, actually." I checked. His hand dropped to the table. "Maybe I got the wrong angle," he said quickly, but his voice wavered. "And Ryan," I continued, turning to him, "you said you saw her at Mia's house, but you never actually saw Mia. Just shadows in the window." Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "And Mark," I said, my gaze now locked on him. "When you followed her to that work dinner, you said everything looked fine. But you hesitated when I asked you about it. Why?" Mark stared at his drink, refusing to meet my eyes. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence. "Look, Jason, This is getting out of hand. Maybe you're just overthinking things. Emily's a great woman. She wouldn't. I cut him off. Save it. I know what's going on. Ethan's mouth snapped shut, and the others exchanged nervous glances. The final blow came when Eddie, who'd had one too many drinks, stumbled off to the bathroom, leaving his phone on the table. The screen lit up with a notification, and without thinking, I picked it up. The group chat was right there. Mark, make sure he doesn't suspect anything. Ryan, if he asks, say you saw her with colleagues. Caleb, it's your turn to cover for her this time. Emily, he's starting to notice. Stay sharp. The words blurred as anger surged through me. My friends, the people I'd trusted most, had been lying to my face. And Emily? She wasn't just lying. She was orchestrating the whole thing. When Eddie returned, I placed his phone on the table without a word. He looked at me, then at the phone, and realization dawned on his face. Everything okay, man? He asked weakly. I smiled, a cold, calculated thing that felt foreign on my face. Oh, everything's fine, Eddie, just fine. I finished my beer, paid the tab, and walked out of the bar without another word. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of their betrayal pressed down on me. Emily's lies were bad enough, but the fact that my closest friends had been complicit? That was a wound I couldn't ignore. But anger wasn't what I felt anymore. Anger was hot, fleeting. What settled over me that night was cold, sharp, and unyielding. It was clarity. The lies had been confirmed, the betrayal exposed. Now it was time to act. They thought they were playing me, but they'd underestimated just how far I was willing to go. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Lying in bed that night, the house silent except for Emily's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't stop replaying the betrayal in my mind. My wife, my closest friends. They had all conspired against me, treating me like some clueless fool. The group chat had been the final straw, the proof I needed to strip away any lingering doubts. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. If they thought I'd sit idly by, allowing them to laugh at me behind my back, they didn't know me at all. Anger was no longer the fuel driving me. It was something colder, sharper. Determination. I wasn't going to yell or storm out. No dramatic accusations, no hasty confrontations. That would be too easy for them to dismiss. Too easy for Emily to spin into some story about me being paranoid or controlling. If I was going to expose her and the friends who had betrayed me, I needed a plan. And not just any plan. It had to be precise, calculated, and executed with patience. The first step was gathering more evidence. I needed undeniable proof, something so concrete that no amount of smooth talking could refute it. The kind of evidence that would not only expose their lies, but leave them scrambling to pick up the pieces. I started small, making subtle changes to my behavior. No more questioning Emily directly or making offhand comments about her whereabouts. I wanted her to feel secure, to believe that her flawless web of lies was holding strong. But behind the scenes, I began my work. I called Jake again, explaining everything. I need you to go further this time, I said. Get me photos, timestamps, whatever you can. I need to know exactly who she's meeting. Jake hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but eventually agreed. Next, I reached out to a private investigator. Someone with no personal ties to Emily or my friends. Someone who could dig deeper than I ever could. The investigator was thorough, and within days, the pieces began falling into place. Bank statements revealing unaccounted-for expenses. GPS data from Emily's car showing detours and stops she hadn't mentioned. Photos of her and the man in the gray suit, standing too close on the hotel terrace, sharing what looked like more than casual conversation. With every new piece of information, my resolve hardened. But this wasn't just about Emily anymore. My so-called friends, Mark, Ryan, Ethan, and Caleb, they had played their part too. covering for her, lying to me, smirking as they thought they were keeping me in the dark. I decided I wouldn't confront them one by one. No, that would dilute the impact. I needed them all together in the same room so they could see the full weight of what they'd done. The idea came to me as I sat in the garage late one night, the faint buzz of the radio in the background. An invitation. Casual, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. "Come over for drinks this weekend," I'd tell them. "Just us, like old times." And they would come, because they wouldn't suspect a thing. When the time came, I'd have everything ready. The photos, the messages, the financial records, all laid out, undeniable and damning. They'd have no room to wiggle, no way to spin their lies. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about clarity, about restoring the balance they had so carelessly disrupted. I wasn't looking for justice. Justice was fair, impartial. I wanted something more, something personal. Let them think they've won for now. The game is still in play, and I'm about to rewrite the rules. The night of the gathering had finally arrived. My living room was spotless, the faint aroma of whiskey lingering from the decanter I'd set out. I'd invited them all: Mark, Ryan, Ethan, Caleb, and of course, Emily. They thought this was just another night to catch up, to laugh and drink like old times. But I wasn't laughing. Not anymore. Each of them arrived on time, their usual banter filling the room. Emily was radiant as ever, her charm as disarming as it was deceptive. She laughed at Ethan's jokes, handed Caleb a drink, and even leaned over to kiss me on the cheek. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. I played my part perfectly, pouring drinks and exchanging pleasantries. But every word they spoke felt hollow. Every laugh grated against my nerves. These weren't my friends. They were conspirators in Emily's lies, complicit in my humiliation. I waited until the drinks were poured and the laughter had settled into a comfortable hum. Then I stood, glass in hand, and raised it for a toast. "To friendship," I said, my voice steady, the edges sharpened with irony. "And to honesty, the glue that holds us all together." They raised their glasses, toasting with smiles that would soon vanish. I reached for the folder I'd placed beneath the coffee table and set it down with deliberate precision. The room fell silent, their eyes flicking between the folder and me. "What's that?" Mark asked, his voice a little too casual. "Proof," I said, my tone as cold as the air that seemed to suddenly weigh down the room. "Of everything." One by one, I laid it out. The photos of Emily on the hotel terrace with the man in the gray suit, the messages from the group chat, the financial discrepancies, and the investigator's report. Emily's face drained of color as she stared at the photos, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. "Jason, I can explain—" "Don't," I cut her off, my voice low but firm. "This isn't the time for more lies." I turned to Mark, Ryan, Ethan, and Caleb, their faces a mix of guilt and panic. "And you," I said, letting my gaze linger on each of them. "My so-called friends. You thought you were clever, covering for her, lying to my face. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out?" Ethan stammered something unintelligible, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. "Get out," I said, my voice steady. "All of you. Leave my house. Leave my life. You've taken enough from me." Mark was the first to stand, his head bowed as he shuffled toward the door. The others followed, their silence louder than any apology could have been. That left Emily. She stood there, staring at me with wide eyes, her lips trembling as she searched for words. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You already did," I replied, my voice cold. "And now, you'll face the consequences." I handed her an envelope containing the divorce papers, neatly signed and waiting for her signature. "You have until tomorrow to get your things and leave," I said, stepping past her toward the door. "This marriage is over." As I closed the door behind her, The silence of the house was deafening. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like the kind of silence I could live with. The game was over, and I had won. Not just the battle, but my freedom, my clarity, my life. And that was enough.